Who truly holds the scepter of power? History shows us a parade of kings, presidents, and chief executive officers. Their faces are etched onto coins and into our shared textbooks. They are the names we remember. But behind these gilded figures, another force is often at work. A quieter, more patient power that does not seek the spotlight, but rather the ear of the one who stands within it. Imagine a 17th century throne room, the air thick with incense and the murmur of courtiers. The king, young and deeply uncertain, shifts on his velvet seat, while a gaunt figure in a simple gray robe leans in, his whisper a silken thread of counsel that will soon become the law of the land. This is the realm of the Eminos Greece, the gray eminence, the true power behind the throne. This influence is a different kind of currency. It is not forged in the mint of official decree, but earned through trust, manipulation, or indispensable knowledge. The official ruler wields authority, the visible, clanking machinery of state. The shadow advisor, however, wields influence, a far more subtle and often more potent tool. They are the strategists, the confidants, the secret keepers. They absorb the risks while the monarch absorbs the glory or the blame. Their anonymity is their greatest armor, shielding them from public scrutiny and the consequences of their counsel. In the shadows, how can we ever truly measure the impact of a decision that was never officially made by the one who guided it? This hidden hand steers the ship of state from a cabin deep below deck, its course corrections felt by all but seen by none. The archetype is timeless, a recurring ghost in the narrative of human governance. It is not confined to the dusty halls of European monarchies or the sprawling palaces of ancient empires. This dynamic thrives today in the corridors of Washington, the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, and the hushed backrooms where global policy is shaped.
The unelected advisor, the billionaire donor, the corporate lobbyist. These are the modern incarnations of the gray eminence. Their power is just as real, their influence just as profound, and their presence often just as obscured from the public eye. Understanding this dynamic is more critical than ever, as it forces us to question where true accountability lies in our own world. We will now begin our journey into this twilight world. We will pull back the curtain on these unseen architects of history, to expose the mechanisms of their power and the legacies they left behind. Their stories are not written in the grand chronicles of rulers, but in the margins, between the lines, and in the unspoken truths that shaped our world. The first thread we pull leads us not to a king, but to the monk who would teach a king how to rule an empire. When does a whisper become a command? In the year 26, on the cliffs of Capri, sea spray misted the parchments held by Lucius Aelius Sejanus. He stood near the emperor Tiberius, his voice a low murmur against the waves, shaping the fate of an empire with each suggestion. Sejanus was not the face on the coins we spoke of, but for a time his hand held the scepter. This archetype of the shadowy advisor, the power behind the throne, is as ancient as civilization. From the grand viziers of Egypt to the eunuchs of the Persian court, history is filled with these gatekeepers. They controlled the flow of all information, deciding which petitions reached the royal ear and which truths were carefully omitted from the daily briefing. How many decrees, signed by a pharaoh, were truly born in the mind of his most trusted subordinate? These were the ultimate unseen architects, the hidden power. Their influence was a quiet river, carving canyons through the landscape of history without ever making a sound. This ancient dynamic of influence is not a relic.
It thrives today in the hushed corridors of political capitals and the glass-walled boardrooms of global corporations, where unelected advisors wield immense authority. Their power, like that of Sejanus, lies in mere proximity and carefully cultivated trust. But as the Roman court would soon discover, such concentrated, unofficial power is dangerously unstable, and its collapse always leaves a vacuum for an even more potent force to emerge from the shadows. What if a king reigned, but a cardinal ruled? The whispers of Sejanus in ancient Rome find their booming echo in 17th century France. Here, the shadow behind the throne was not a mere courtier, but a prince of the church, Armand Jean Duplessis, Cardinal Richelieu. Serving the insecure King Louis XIII,
Richelieu transformed the role of advisor into that of a master strategist, playing a grand game of chess with the soul of a nation. He was the architect, and the king was often merely the cornerstone he placed. On a cold November day in 1630, the Queen Mother cornered her son in the Luxembourg Palace. She demanded he choose her, his mother, or the cardinal. Convinced of her victory, she watched Louis dismiss Richelieu, whose face remained a stoic mask. But later that day, the cardinal slipped through a secret passage to the king's small hunting lodge at Versailles, securing his power in a single quiet conversation. This was the infamous Day of the Dupes, a masterclass in survival.
His goal was absolute monarchy, with its power centralized not in the king's person, but in the enduring office of the crown, an office he effectively controlled. Power behind power. His methods were as systematic as they were brutal. He established a vast network of domestic spies, the Cabinet Noir, to silence dissent before it could fester. He crushed the Huguenot nobles at La Rochelle, not for their faith, but for their challenge to royal authority. The state, for Richelieu, became a machine, and he was its chief engineer. This very idea, that the state has its own cold logic separate from the ruler, echoes in the corridors of power today. It justifies actions taken in the name of national security across the globe. But while Richelieu built a powerful state, he also created a template for a new kind of shadow. What happens when this power is not wielded by a brilliant statesman, but by something far more diffuse? What if the greatest power was held by those forbidden from ever holding office? The gambits of Sejanus and Richelieu were for titles. For women, power was a different game, played with whispers and bloodlines. In first-century Rome, Agrippina the Younger mastered this art. A great-granddaughter of Augustus, she used her lineage as both a shield and a weapon, orchestrating the ascension of her son, Nero, to the imperial throne. She was a strategist operating from within the gilded cage of the imperial family, proving an emperor's mother could be more powerful than the emperor himself. The hidden power. Picture Agrippina in her villa's lamplight, reviewing reports from spies. Her fingers trace the lineage of a rival senator, a threat to Nero's future. It was here, far from the Senate, that the empire's fate was decided. This template of influence echoes through time. But what happens when the puppet decides he no longer needs the puppeteer? In 18th century France, Madame de Pompadour perfected this unofficial authority. As chief mistress to King Louis XV, she transformed her position into an undeclared ministry. Her apartments at Versailles became the real center of government, where ministers sought her counsel before approaching the king. She championed Enlightenment thinkers and influenced foreign policy, shaping the cultural and political fabric of her era without a single decree. Her endorsement launched careers, her displeasure ended them. This legacy of informal influence is no relic. It thrives today where proximity to leadership often matters more than an official title. But if a whisper could redirect an empire, what happens when the power behind the throne is not a person, but the silent hand of money? What if a bank vault held more power than a king's treasury? The industrial age forged a new shadow. Power shifted from the palace to the counting house. The games of Sejanus and Richelieu were whispers for courtly access. In the 19th century, influence was capital. Power was no longer proximity to a monarch, but the ability to finance or ruin them. The scepter was being quietly replaced by the stock ticker. Imagine London, June 1815. A nervous quiet grips the stock exchange. Nathan Rothschild sells his bonds, signaling Napoleon's victory at Waterloo. Panic erupts. But his private couriers knew the truth. Wellington was victorious. As prices collapsed, his agents secretly bought the market, securing a legendary fortune. It was a demonstration that private capital and information could now eclipse the state. When a government must borrow from a citizen to wage war, who is sovereign? In America, this power found its titan in John Pierpont Morgan. He didn't just advise presidents, he commanded markets. During the Panic of 1907, he locked top financiers in his library, forcing them to pledge funds to save the system. He acted as a one-man Federal Reserve before it existed. Power shifts. This legacy is no relic.
The tension between private finance and public governance defines our modern world today. Corporate influence on policy directly echoes Morgan's authority. Their story shows that power follows capital. And as these titans passed, their influence did not vanish. It began to coalesce into something larger, more anonymous, and far more influential.
What if the most powerful man was not the one in the Oval Office? The industrial magnates forged a world of steel, but the 20th century forged a new power from secrets. The games of Sejanus and Richelieu were reborn in an age of surveillance. In Washington, one man held the keys for nearly 50 years. Late one evening in 1961, the only light in John Edgar Hoover's office came from a desk lamp, glinting off the brass handles of his private files. Inside lay the sins of senators, the indiscretions of activists, and the vulnerabilities of presidents, each one a carefully cataloged thread in his vast web of influence. He wasn't merely the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was the nation's permanent confessor and its most feared blackmailer. His reign was a quiet one, built on the currency of fear. Across the Iron Curtain, his counterparts in the Soviet Union perfected a different kind of control. The KGB did not just collect secrets on individuals, they were the architects of the state's official reality. They were the ultimate arbiters of truth, their authority absolute, and their methods invisible, weaving a tapestry of paranoia. Through programs of disinformation and psychological warfare, they could turn neighbor against neighbor, transforming an entire society into a self-policing panopticon. How can one fight a shadow that controls not only your actions, but your very perception of the world? The unseen hand. This was puppetry on a national scale, where the strings were not attached to limbs, but directly to thoughts. What if the vote you cast was decided before you ever reached the ballot box? The whispers of Sejanus and the statecraft of Richelieu have not vanished. They have evolved, their essence distilled into algorithms and focus groups. The new court is not a palace of marble, but a campaign war room of glowing screens and buzzing servers. Imagine the strategist Karl Rove in the early 2000s, hunched over a map of Ohio late at night. The air is thick with stale coffee as he points to a single demographic in a single county, saying, "We don't need to win their hearts, we just need to make the other side's voters too discouraged to leave their homes." This is the new hidden power, a cold, calculated science of influence wielded by figures who never face an electorate themselves. The architect's design. When a message is so perfectly tailored to your deepest fears and desires, is it still democratic persuasion, or has it become a form of psychological puppetry? This potent playbook was refined and exported across the Atlantic.
In the United Kingdom, the enigmatic Dominic Cummings deployed similar tactics, leveraging deep-seated cultural divisions and a simple, brutally effective slogan, "Take back control," to drive the Brexit campaign to its stunning victory in 2016. He bypassed traditional media gatekeepers, speaking directly to voters through micro-targeted digital ads. This created a powerful echo chamber that constantly reinforced his narrative, while making any opposing views seem alien and distant. Like the industrial magnates who controlled the railroads, these strategists understood that controlling the new infrastructure, the very pipelines of information, was the ultimate source of modern power. This fundamental shift from public rhetoric to private targeted messaging is the defining feature of contemporary political warfare. It ensures that the most influential arguments are often the ones the public never hears, whispered directly into the digital ear of a carefully selected voter. The power of these architects now extends far beyond a single election cycle, embedding their ideologies deep within the machinery of government long after the victory parties have ended. And today, as data becomes ever more granular and algorithms more predictive, their ability to shape our reality grows exponentially, exerting a quiet, persistent pressure on the levers of democracy itself. The games of Richelieu were for a king's favor, but these new games are for the soul of the public square. The question is no longer merely who sits on the throne, but who writes the code that puts them there. What if the world's public square was owned and operated by a handful of men? In a glass-walled conference room, air-conditioned to a precise chill, a chief executive officer in a plain gray t-shirt sketches a flowchart. His decision, made over lukewarm coffee, determines what over 2 billion people will see as truth tomorrow morning. The whispers of Sejanus are now lines of code. Richelieu's statecraft is now a platform's terms of service. This is a new kind of sovereignty, borderless and accountable to no electorate, built not on land or armies, but on the invisible architecture of data and attention. The industrial magnates controlled the steel that built our cities. These new titans control the infrastructure of our thoughts. Their decrees are not passed in parliaments, but are deployed in software updates. A single policy change on content moderation, decided in private, can silence a political movement in one country or amplify disinformation in another. It's a power far exceeding that of the old spy masters, who could only hope to manipulate information, not control its very channels of distribution. When a single algorithm can sway an election more effectively than any modern campaign strategist's playbook, where does democracy truly reside? This is not just business, it is governance without consent, unelected power. The decisions made in these digital fiefdoms now directly challenge the laws of sovereign nations, creating a global battle over who writes the rules for our future. And as these new kings fortify their digital empires, another shadow is learning to exploit the very code they wrote. What connects a Roman whisper to a single line of code? The stage changes, but the play remains the same. From the cliffs of Capri, where Sejanus steered an empire, to the halls where Richelieu remade a nation from shadow, the true architects of power have always stood just out of sight. The industrialist's checkbook replaced the courtier's whisper. The spy master's dossier replaced the royal decree. Today, the algorithm quietly replaces them all. The tools evolve, but the ambition is timeless. A quiet influence, the invisible hand. A lone commuter scrolls a feed on a late train. The city lights a soft blur against the window.
They see manufactured outrage, then a targeted advertisement, then a comforting distraction, each piece curated by a silent, unseen logic. This is the new courtier's game, played not for the ear of a single monarch, but for the collective attention of billions. When the stone walls of the palace are replaced by the invisible architecture of a digital platform, who do we even hold accountable for the narratives that shape our world? This is not just history, it is a user manual for the 21st century. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward reclaiming our own agency in an age where influence is the world's most valuable and hidden currency. The forces shaping our reality, from our political views to what we consume, operate best when we believe they are not there at all. Even Sejanus eventually faced the light. Power, however concealed, ultimately relies on our consent, our attention, and our inaction. The shadows have been unraveled, the mechanisms exposed. Now that we see the hands pulling the strings, the choice of what to do is truly ours.